Would you send your baby to childcare when they're 6 weeks old?
See, this question gets me because I personally sent my first baby to childcare at 6 months and my identical twin sister sent hers at 12 months. And I copped it from friends, from family who were like, are you sure? Is it too early? And I felt so guilty. I had to go back to work. I wanted to go back to work, but the guilt was huge. And that fear of like, are they going to look after my baby was huge. So I feel like this is a really personal one. And to get the answers today and make everyone else who is in that exact same position feel better, we're going to speak to an expert about exactly that.
Lucky, Anika, we have got one lined up for you. Today we're going to talk with Professor Tricia Eadie from Melbourne University and get the lowdown on all of these questions us mums are thinking and feeling guilty about a lot of the time.
Today we're joined by Professor Tricia Eadie, one of Australia's leading experts on how young children learn and develop. Tricia's research has shaped what we know about early language, high-quality learning environments, and what truly supports children's development in those all-important first years, which makes her the perfect person to help us explore today's big question. When it comes to starting childcare, how much does age actually matter? And is there really such a thing as too young? Welcome to the podcast, Tricia.
Thank you.
We'll jump straight in with the big question that I think is extremely common. How young is too young for childcare? And what does the evidence actually tell us about that? Is there such a thing as too young?
So I'm probably going to have a certain repetition to some of my answers today. And that is that rather than framing things as too young, too old, I want us to really be focusing on the quality and understanding what quality means in early childhood education and care settings, but for different age groups. So one of the things that's really important to think about is what stage is my child at? And therefore, what am I going to be looking at in the early childhood and education and care services I want or I'm thinking of using to be able to understand whether it's the right fit for me. I think the second point I would make is that every family in every street, in every city in Australia is different, and their circumstances are different, and their context of why they need to use early childhood education and care can be really different. And so it's not about what am I doing compared to Anika down the road. It's what do I need for my family that's going to meet all of the different circumstances that our family's in.
It's a really good point. So, yeah, it's all about the individual, not about the age, to sum it up. So we're obviously, when we're focusing on age, it might not be the right thing. So you talked about individual situations. What do you think are those kind of signs that your child might be ready for childcare as an individual?
So again, it's about what's appropriate for the age of the child.
Okay.
So if I've got a 12-month-old infant and I'm thinking about returning to work, or it's really important for my family for me to return to work, then what's really important for a 12-month-old? Well, for a 12-month-old, what's really important is relationships and responsive relationships, security, consistency, and feeling secure and attached to the people that are caring for them. And so it's not so much about is that particular 12-month-old ready, because I would argue all children can be ready, but we need to be patient and think about what they need. And that's where thinking about the services and the service characteristics and the quality that that service provides for young children is really important.
One thing I've heard a lot of parents say, and I don't know if it's backed, is that they worry of having multiple caregivers, especially with a baby, it will overwhelm them or it's not quite right for them. Is there any evidence behind that?
So in most instances, infants have more than one caregiver. So having multiple caregivers is actually normal. What usually you want to look for, though, is consistency in those caregivers. So thinking about a stable workforce, for example, in an early childhood education setting is a really good question to ask.
Okay, so making sure, that you've got a team that is around your child that is permanent or at least semi-permanent so that you know who's going to be in the room with them. Perfect. And then from a developmental perspective, again, in those early days, a lot of people are concerned and a lot of parents we've heard from have kind of questioned whether a childcare service can meet the needs of a young baby. Do you think they can realistically meet those needs in terms of attachment and all those sorts of things?
Yes, I think they can, but it all comes down to quality.
Okay.
And so that's about the workforce, about the stability, the skills of the workforce. It's about the programs, the cultural responsiveness. There's a whole range of things that ensure that a service can provide high quality care for an infant.
Tricia, I'll ask you to put your researcher hat back on for a moment. Is there any research to suggest that there is a sort of developmental difference between little ones who start childcare very, very early, like say, from 6 weeks old, compared to a child that starts at maybe like 2 years old? Is there a difference in the educational and developmental outcomes starting care at those different ages?
So research is interesting in that space, and I will answer the question, but I just want to explain that different countries have different systems, and those systems allow for families to access different amounts of care. Mm-hmm. So, for example, in Australia, we've just had the 3-day guarantee introduced. So that means a number of families who weren't previously able to access that care now have 3 days of care that they may be putting their child into earlier. So what the research tells us is that if children are vulnerable, and that could be developmentally, or it could be that their circumstances are different to other children and other families, then starting early is a really strong positive thing, because what it means is they get that consistency of high, and it must be high quality.
Yeah.
There are research projects in the United States that started in the 1970s and 1980s. Those children who were getting intensive programs from very early on have now been studied in terms of their long-term outcomes. And what we know about those groups of children is that they have higher rates of finishing high school, they have better employment histories, their health is actually better, their health and well-being in adulthood is actually better than children from very similar circumstances. And some of these children were from very disadvantaged areas, that their outcomes are significantly better. If you think about attendance and children's development, it's not a line where the more attendance you have, the stronger your outcomes. It's an inverted U. So if you don't have very much at all, or if you have too much, then the development is lower and it peaks in around the 30 to 40 hour mark. So the other thing we know is that children that attend regularly early on have much better school attendance and school outcomes.
Okay. So there is something about school readiness in there as well,
Yes.
that there are benefits in terms of school readiness. I think that's fantastic to hear, because I think there's so much, again, stigma at the moment in particular, I find. I don't know if it's since the 3-day guarantee has come out, but there's been a lot of talk about, when the question of vouchers for nannies and things has come back on, and not against that at all. I think there are benefits to that too. But with that has come this stigma that childcare can be a bad thing, even though it is a big choice and it's an individual choice for a lot of families. So it is good to hear that, there are positives to starting that learning journey quite early as well. So
I think a really important point too here is that a universal system, which provides for everyone, is what maximises flexibility and choice for all families.
Yeah.
So that is a really important ingredient of what the current reforms in the early childhood education and care sector are doing. They're trying to make sure that every child has access. Whether or not every family chooses to participate is a different question, but it's the universal nature that gives families choice and flexibility.
Back on your point, because you talked about communication between educators and services with you as a parent. I know often we've all got those apps that give you the notifications about how long they've slept or what they've done, but I suppose a lot of that is surface level. How can you kind of have that deeper level relationship where you're actually understanding how they're going?
We would argue that engagement and that relationship with families and the partnerships that are developed with families is a key standard in quality, and it actually is in the national quality standards. One of the standards that services get assessed against is their collaboration and their partnerships with families. So it's not something that you're asking extra for. It's what services and early childhood settings should be establishing and allowing for that shared decision-making and that communication with parents.
So in other words, if that's something you're not getting, there may be something not quite right there because it's an expectation, not an added extra.
So it's not an added extra. It's one of the standards in the National Quality Framework. So services should be thinking about their parent and family engagement strategies. You know, it's not just about communication. It's about culture and the values and beliefs that the families in your or in their community hold, and they should be responsive to those as well.
Tricia, we've worked with many, many services, and this is such an interesting thing to think about because we will go into a service and we'll be focusing on educators and the other staff in that service and how they interact with the children. But I think a lot of parents don't consider how they feel and how they feel that they've been received and listened to as a parent. I would like to think that lots of services really work hard at this, but in my experience, it's not the case. I've gone to lots of services where I haven't felt like the educators felt really confident to have a chat with me as a parent. I find myself a lot of the time having to ask the questions. The information isn't forthcoming. I wondered, have you seen services where they're very proactive about helping educators and their team sort of, I guess, almost learn these skills to keep communication open and build relationships with families? Because it doesn't come naturally to all of us adults. Like, we might be fabulous working with children and caring for children, but when it comes to talking to other adults, sometimes that's hard.
I think one of the challenges as well as the positives in early childhood education and care services is that there are a lot of different people employed at different qualification levels. And in the sort of work we're talking about, qualifications matter. That's why teachers, a qualified teacher, a bachelor-trained teacher, is in charge of the educational program in every room. That doesn't mean that there aren't other people, other adults in the room, the educators you're talking about, who also have qualifications, but they may have less experience or less knowledge about establishing those relationships. So one of the things that, again, I'm going to go back to the sorts of things we look for when we're thinking about quality in early childhood programs is the leadership of the service, how leaders are actually enabling all of their staff to have those really meaningful conversations with parents. And you're absolutely right. You know, if I'm a young woman who might have English as a second language in my first job in a room, having those conversations with parents could be quite intimidating. And so one of the things that a lot of our work focuses on and that really high quality services do is they provide that professional learning and coaching to actually build skills. This is about education and care, and often, depending on the age of the children, we might want to prioritise care over education. But it really is about understanding that this is the foundation part of Australia's education system. It's not funded in the same way and it's not necessarily valued in the same way, But we really need to start talking about that. And that's why this opportunity for me is really important, because people are doing their best. They're often undervalued. They're usually underpaid.
Yep.
We don't pay them a lot. And they are really busy, really busy. And so finding the space to have those meaningful conversations with parents, to do all of the regulatory things that need to be done to ensure safety of young children. So all of those things add up. So sometimes what I would say is, if it's a one-off occurrence where you can't have that conversation with an educator or a teacher, try again next time, because often we don't know what's happened in that day, in that room. You know, all sorts of things might have happened that we won't know about because of privacy. But it could have been a really challenging day. And so it's worthwhile persisting and seeing whether it's actually the culture of the service or whether it's just that you've caught somebody at the end of a really long day.
Yeah, so a bit of mutual understanding. That, it works both ways. So the onus is not only on the educator or the educator team, but the parent as well. So, you know, if you're feeling that need to ask, I suppose have the confidence to ask. Because I suppose if you don't ask the question, nothing's going to change.
No.
What can parents do at home to support their child's learning in the early years, in addition to going to formal childcare or early education or kindergarten?
So our work, which has followed a number of children actually born in Victoria for a very long time, one of the single most important things that parents can do is share books with their children.
This is my favourite
I was
topic.
about to just make Kate's day.
I was like, please say it, Tricia. Please say it, Tricia. Yes.
So parents and caregivers in the home, those relationships need to be warm and responsive as well. But we know that through shared book reading or just sharing books with children, some parents are more confident at reading or role playing and whatever. So just think about books as places to share what you're seeing and what you're thinking about. They do all sorts of things. There is joint attention, there's vocabulary, there's understanding the emotions that are happening in the story. There are all sorts of things that children learn through shared book experiences.
And is that from any age? Because I know when I had a baby, I'd heard this, you should read to your child. But and with my first, I did it. I sat there with a book and I'm like, oh, I'm reading to a baby who's not really staring at. Is there any evidence to say at that early age it is good, or is it kind of there's a set age that we should start doing that?
I think you do it from as early as you feel comfortable with.
Okay.
And the research does say that it's also about the rituals and the routines of reading a book or sharing a book with the child as well.
Of course, the quality time. You mentioned play-based learning as well, which I think is a big one. We hear all the time about let your kids be bored. What are the benefits of play? Because I know as a parent, sometimes I find it really hard. I'm like, are they actually learning anything, or are they just mucking around for however many hours? How do you tell the difference as a parent?
I think it's the sorts of play that's happening and the sorts of goals that you can see or that the teachers and educators are sharing with you. So there are all sorts of objectives that teachers are thinking about. That's the intentional piece. So part of the early years learning framework talks about how teachers and educators are intentional in what they do with children. So if you think about the intention being, what is this group of children's main interests? Let's set up some learning experiences that will be done through play so that the children have that sense of agency in what they're doing, but it's been designed and implemented by a teacher who actually understands children's learning and understands the sorts of learning experiences that are appropriate for that age group and that group of children, because she or he will know those children very well.
And Tricia, a parent can go into a service or if they're on a tour considering enrolling, or if their little one's already attending and they would like to know more about the curriculum and the teaching and learning activities, they can ask, can't they? Can say, oh, this looks fun. What's going on here? What are we learning here? What's your plan for this activity? Because educators will be able to tell them all sorts of incredible things that these little ones are picking up from an activity that seems super simple and like, oh, they're just playing, but there's so much more behind it. Parents can ask, can't they?
Parents can certainly ask, and teachers will be able to talk to them about that or show them. And the early years learning framework actually has in it what's called a planning cycle. And in that planning cycle, it's about knowing children, understanding what they can do now, what they can do with a little bit of support, and where they go to next. So if teachers and all teachers in Australia should be thinking about the early years learning framework, then they're also thinking about that planning cycle and what they're doing.
All right, Tricia, thank you so much for talking to us today. I feel like we've learned so much, and so interesting to hear the research and evidence base behind all this stuff that is so important to parents and their kids. Thank you.
Thank you.